So now we're going to do a fun drawing of an integration straddling the threshold of the critic and the muse. Now the critic and the muse, again, is that spectrum of voice, and we just call it's not a literal thing, the critic and the muse. We're just calling it that so we can get a hold of it. You can think of the critic as the neglected part that has fierce wisdom for you. It's actually an early warnings teacher. And the muse as often this very exiled, hidden, wild self. But in mythology, those two would sort of exist as one in a story and spectrums. And anytime you have stories that include beings, for example, lycanthropes that are like the seal woman or the fox woman or the shark boy, in every culture, ancient cultures, there's stories of beings who are both and, right? What culture are you coming from? Do you have a story, a name of a story? Like I grew up with the Selkie, the seal woman, and with the fox woman. Did you grow up with some stories where there was a both and creature? Of course, we've heard about it in like vampires and werewolves. That's sort of like a different iteration. But like beings who could switch to both, between the girl and the butterfly, between being a human or being the moon, right? There's all of these amazing stories, and maybe you could share just a few of the myths that you grew up with, and if there were any stories of the both and. Even in Little Red Riding Hood, even though the wolf isn't becoming grandmother, there's still this sense of like these two aspects of beingness. And in mythology, this has been used so powerfully. But at Intentional Creativity, we also feel like it's a time for an integration from the separation that those stories imposed. So I'll tell you. That when I grew up with this, the Selkie story exists in many different cultures, but the culture I knew about it from is more of a Celtic tradition. And it's the story of the day that the fisherman is out and the air around him changes as he hears the sounds of women laughing. And he moves his little boat up to the side of the rock and he looks and he sees these incredible women like he's never seen before. And he's lonely. And he's just watching and savoring and feeling a sense of, oh, there are these women. But then as the day grew longer, the women began to pick up their seal skins from the rock and to put them on and slip back into the sea. One by one, they returned to their skin, to their true self, and dipped back under the darkness of the waters. And just as the last one was about to take her skin on herself, he pulled it from her. And a negotiation began between the fisherman and the Selkie woman. This negotiation took place between a human and a creature, which represents the both and world, the wild, natural world. But it wasn't a fair exchange because he made her make a bargain that if she would come and stay with him for 7 years, he would return her skin to you. Let's just pause the story for a moment as I just ask you, do you remember, don't go into any deep trauma stuff here, but just like, do you remember a moment where you were faced with this kind of decision? You just really didn't have that much of a choice. Like, what were you going to do? And then how would you behave? I mean, some of us married the fisherman, let go of our seal life, and forgot all about it. Some of us went to our death, jumped off the rock, like, fuck that, I'm never going to marry that guy or go with that guy. Like, I'm not doing that. There's so many iterations of things. And I often ask myself, where were the other seals? Why didn't they overturn his boat? So I'm inviting you to be the seals who would overturn the boat of the fishermen for each other in that moment. That's a call to action. That's a call to unity. That's a call to allyship. That's a call to discomfort. That's a call to, we don't know what's going to happen. But if you're ever in that situation, which actually we are all the time, we're all the time in that situation. But as it turns out, she agrees and she goes into the boat and she goes home with him. And for a time, she makes her home there. She makes the food and mends the clothes, and she's in her human form. And there's even some day-to-day acceptance and happiness, and there's a forgetting. Meanwhile, the fisherman has hid her skin in the rafters. She even becomes pregnant and has a child, and she loves the child, but there's always something missing. She can hear it. She remembers a sense of her sealness, of her wildness. She doesn't have any access to it. It's been so long, and she's in this world now, and there's needs here. There's food that has to be put on the table. There are things that need to be mended. There are men to make love with. There are children to feed. And she goes on. But still, she's listening for this call. You could think of that call to the wild, of that return, and that deep longing, in this case, as a sense of your deepest creative life force, of your muse, like calling to, you've heard it, right? I mean, you've heard the voice, you've heard the seal calling, you've heard the muse beckoning to you. And so as the story unfolds, one day, the child who is climbing discovers the sealskin, and the child is a combination, right, of the human and of the wild, of the natural. And the child knows what this is. And the child then is caused to make a decision about whether to tell mother about the skin. The child chooses to tell the mother. And the mother, by this time, is drying out. Her hair is falling out. She cannot exist in the domesticity any longer. The light has gone out of her eyes. She's forgotten to ask for her skin. She tends her child. She moves through her days. And it's because the child knows that the mother is dying that the child shows mommy where the skin is. Think of that within ourselves, like how the innocence within us wants us to remember who we are. And so the mother puts on the skin and she's gone. Because that call is greater for her than even being a mother. Neglecting that, she had to return to her truest nature to find her life again. And now we have an extreme separation from domesticity and a return to the wild and a sorrowing on all sides and a betrayal. You could think of all of those characters in the way that Irish fairy tales look at it as if they're all you or all parts of your psyche. Or you could think of them as archetypes. The legends say that you must always return to your wildest nature or you will not survive. And the prevention of that from yourself or by others will take you out. And that story has been being told for a long time. In other parts of that story, the mother and the child can see each other across the waters and connect. But in most of these kinds of both and stories that straddle the thresholds, there is rarely a return to each other. There's rarely a reuniting. The wild woman and the domestic man apart. The wild man and the domestic woman apart. Or whatever gender or non-gender, like that's these two characters of the domestic and the wild, both spectrums of a seeming duality apart. At what point do they come back together again in us? At what point does the fisherman self, who is sort of like the settler mentality of the people who come into territories like Hawaii, Australia, United States, what's now known as Mexico, when the settlers and the conquestors come, there's a kind of a fisherman. I'm going to take it. I'm going to take it. I'm going to bargain, but then I'm not going to keep the bargain. We all have that. And then there's the part of us that wants to be free and wild and be with those who are like us and don't want to be over there for good reason. And then there's the creation that comes out and the betrayal of that. And then the child and the child's call to both parents and to both land and sea. But what I want you to think about in this moment is, how will we move forward? What needs to be amplified? What parts of the story, what parts of the mythology do we need to explore? How have we archetypalized these qualities within ourselves and within our marriages, and within our communities, within our institutions? What happens next? Will you overturn the boat of the fisherman? Will you come to the house of the fisherman and the Selkie woman and invite them to a dialogue that's really uncomfortable, but that they're going to lose if they don't have? Will you be the child developing and seeking union? Will the Selkie somehow miss the fisherman despite herself and they meet on a rock and talk? Is it utopian, dystopian? What happens next? And that's where we are in our world and our culture. Myths have taken us only so far, and inherent in those myths are a lot of dogmatism, sexism, racism, separatism. And we're at a point where we've come so far, and they bring a lot. But there's an emergent mythology happening within our own community where we're not accepting the separation of the domestic and the wild in the same way. And in fact, right now, we're really home in a domestic place. We have to find our wild here. Can the tending of the day-to-day and the lovers and the children's and the relationships, can that exist while the wild exists? And the invitation is to see that your wild exists through your creativity. That you don't have to leave your family or your home to find that. That wild place exists within you. You could think of that story all as places within you. The place within you that wants structure and that wants order and that does not want to acknowledge the wild and wants to control and dominate and keep things the same, wants to take. And the part of you that just wants to be free and wild and in the sea and not have to answer to anything or anybody. And then there's a child who usually always wants their parents to be talking. And even especially when they don't want to. So for you, how can you bring attention and intention to that wild within you? My mothers would say to me, never let anyone hide your skin. That's what I was raised with. They didn't do very good at helping me understand the qualities of how to not have your skin found, how to protect yourself, and or how to not be the fisherman. Like, it's like, where's the rest of instruction? Don't let them hide my skin, but who's they? Who's gonna hide it? Like, what? I need a little more information here about how to negotiate with this. And so where we are in intentional creativity is looking at all aspects of those qualities of stories like that and asking what happens next. What happens next in the story? And how have those mythologies shaped us to such a degree that we don't even know? They say it's the water we swim in. Even our astrological signs and symbols and what we call our astrological sign are deeply rooted in patriarchal Greek Roman mythology, which is totally unkind to women, children, and humans. It's not right, y'all. It's hard stuff, and we've internalized it, and we don't even know. We don't even know that we're relating with these old energies. And I'm not saying we need to let all those go, but I am saying after we say, don't let anyone hide your skin, then what? I am saying, oh my God, there are so many fishermen out there. We're going to have to learn to talk to them. And that's really scary, because that's a lot of people in the world. How can I get through to the fisherman, to the hunter, to the conquestor, to the person keeping institutionalism in place, to people unconscious about the impacts of white supremacy, the people who are in misogynistic frameworks and act like they're not? How are we ever going to speak to them? And is that mine to do? The only way I can survive that is through being in connection with my wild nature. That is the only thing, the only nurturance which I'm going to have, which is going to fortify me to address these systems, which are external and internal. We have internalized many of them. Our archetypes are all mashed up with them. What would it be like today to set yourself free from some of those constraints that have been binding you, when you realize that they're all made up? The consequences are very real, but they're constructs, and they're not true. And so we're participating in stories that oppress, and that we use to oppress ourselves and oppress others. I'm interested in a dialogue between the Selkie and the fisherman, and the child in the earth and the ocean. How does that work? What would need to happen in order for that dialogue to take place for each one of us inside of our lives? When we stay in relationships that are harmful for us, when we stay in jobs or systems that are harmful for us, we need to go and get our skin, and we're going to lose something. But what if there's something we haven't tried yet? What if there's something we haven't tried yet? And I think for me, one of the first places of repair in the psyche to begin to try to straddle the paradoxes that we're dealing with is to unite the voice of the critic and the muse, which is a much longer process, but we're going to start it today, because that is the ultimate paradox, how you speak to yourself. That is the ultimate threshold to hear your voice as your own. If I didn't hear my voice as my own, there's no way I could stand up here and speak to you. I have an agenda, I have a pattern, there are things I'm doing, I have a list in front of me, but I couldn't be here just being with you the way that I am if I couldn't hear my own voice. And I would love to be in a community of women, and all gendered and non-gendered, like all human beings, that can hear themselves. Like, wouldn't that be amazing? Imagine what different kind of things we would say. It would be messy for a while, but it could be really awesome. So let's draw a reuniting of the critic and the muse. This is a brave action. Are you ready? Do you feel scared? I do. So we're going to draw the reuniting. So that means we're going to draw both the critic as it is and the muse as it is, almost like those masks of comedy and tragedy, right? So I will demonstrate, and then we'll go ahead and do it, and maybe our team can find some music that might be appropriate for this. But here's the intentional creativity part. As you move the pen, the mending is beginning. You're signaling to your brain through choice, which is creating a cascade, which is impacting your whole system, which is amplifying the potential, and then it's recircuiting. The whole thing is circuiting. So you don't have to go fast, and I won't be able to talk while I'm doing it. So I'm just going to watch my pen, and I'll just give the example. I'm going to start with the critic. I'm going to go with the muse. And here they are. Picasso's nothing on me, right? I mean, I'm saying. There it is. So, critic, muse. One system, and that's what a lot of what we're dealing with today, right? Is this idea of it's spectrums, but it's not really opposites. They're actually one thing, a voice, and we're trading the parts by calling them together and asking for there to be a mending. And then as soon as you finish the drawing, I invite you to just write one word, whatever word that comes out. Don't edit. Okay, kapow. Just, you just got to do whatever. Just trust what they say. Okay, so now you're going to do it. It's a trippy feeling, y'all. It's a big deal to begin to recircuit things which you've mostly been talking about your critic. Some of us around here have been talking about our muse. But critic is like way out there in the world. Critic is like the top of social media, right? Critic is like boss in this world, where the muse is not as out there. So you may have given a lot of airtime to the critic, and now we're healing that. And it's brave. And there's also, that science behind this, where as you're drawing it, it's beginning to happen. And the synapses start to fire. And your consciousness is like, wow, thank you. Thank you for mending this seeming divide, which is an illusion, which becomes sort of constructed into kinds of thoughts and patterns and behaviors and ways and different psychosis things that we do with it. Like we really do a number on it. Now we're just saying, hey, we want to have this united voice and include the fierceness and the playful wildness and have them speak through as one. Let's try it. All right, dear ones, coming to completion. If you feel like sharing your musey uniting word in the chat, that's great. So this word becomes like a magic word. You know the word abracadabra? It's like, as I say it, so it is. It's like this. This is happening now. And so when you say your word, so when I say kapow, that's a moment where I'm asking my consciousness to reconcile itself. Because when I'm not able to make a decision or I feel confused about something, it's often because there's a division and I'm not straddling both worlds. I'm in one camp or another. I'm in the logical or the mythical. And they need to be brought together.